Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello everyone, and welcome in to another episode here of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford here with Gene Henley, bringing you another episode of the show. We're in the postseason, we're in March Madness, and Gene, we have a ton to cover, a lot of good news, a lot of interesting conversations to have. Before we get into all that, I want to say thank you to all of you who are here. If it's your first time listening, thank you so much. You can subscribe to our podcast with Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. We're on all kinds of places, iHeartRadio as well as the place, so check us out everywhere you get your podcasts. We're also here on YouTube. If you're watching this, please subscribe to the channel while you're here and give this video a like. And also turn on the notifications as well. And leave your comments down below, your thoughts on anything we cover here on this episode. If you all tuned into the live stream I did Sunday night, thank you all so much for that. And if you want to go back and catch the replay of it, you can check it out just on the YouTube channel. It should be one of the most recent videos on there that was streamed Sunday, and the replay is up available for anyone to watch. Well, Gene, for the first time in 43 years, first time since 1979, Tennessee is the SEC Tournament champion. I still can't believe, it still hasn't, I don't know, it hasn't really sunk into me yet that Tennessee did that they actually won 3 straight games in the SEC Tournament to win the title. You beat Mississippi State, which in a pretty handily in your first game in the quarters. You beat Kentucky and really, led that one for, I think, pretty much the whole game too. And beat them by, 5 to 7 points. I can't remember the final. I think 69-62, so 7 points. And then you come out and lead wire to wire, jump out to a 14-0 lead over a surprising Texas A&M squad, and never trailed in that one. They got it down to 5 points at one point, but even then I didn't really feel that nervous. I was a little nervous, but I didn't feel that sense of dread coming on or anything. And Vescovi goes out and has 9 points on his own, hits a 3, gets a steal, or I think he hit a 3. I'm trying to remember how this happened. I know he made 3 free throws, and then he got the steal and hit another 3, I think is what happens. He had a sequence that was incredible. Tennessee wins it. Kennedy Chandler goes and gets the SEC Tournament MVP, which I think he deserves it. I think you could have made a case for Josiah-Jordan James, but I think Kennedy Chandler was well deserving of that. But Gina, I had to look it up because I was curious. Before this weekend, the last time Tennessee won the SEC Tournament title, Rick Barnes was 24 years old and was an assistant at Davidson, and it was still 8 years away before getting his first head coaching job at George Mason. And now he's been coaching as a head coach for 35 uninterrupted years and has 700 plus victories as a head coach. That's how long it was. Rick Barnes was 24 and now he's 67. So he graduated from Lenore Ryan 2 years before Tennessee won the last time they'd won the SEC tournament. So that is how long, just kind of put in perspective how long it's been since Tennessee had won it. I can't believe the streak's over, and I am legitimate. I was obviously very happy Sunday, and if you guys tuned in the live stream, you saw just kind of my reaction to that, and also the NCAA tournament, which we'll get to in a second. But Gene, this team is worth. We've talked about it, I think, a couple times here on this podcast about that loss on the road to Kentucky, the blowout loss in Lexington. That was a turning point for Tennessee's season. If you look back at and track just Tennessee's, I guess their uptick in play and how they've played since then, that's where the turning point was. They've only lost 2 games since then, and it was a 1-point loss on the road to Texas, and then a loss on the road to Arkansas in a game where we've belabored the point about the officiating and the offense in that one. But it's still a closely contested game on the road there. Those are the only 2 losses Tennessee's had, both true road games and both against teams that are in the NCAA tournament now. And Tennessee went on to, again, they've now won 7-8 straight games. I forget how many in a row now, but now they're the SEC tournament champions. And that's something that I legit never expected to say. And I think this team deserves a lot. There's a lot of players in this team that deserve a lot of credit, and Rick Barnes deserves a lot of credit, but there's just a lot of credit to be given for this team for really just fighting through it and gelling at the appropriate time.
Yeah, it was huge. When you're talking about 43 years, it's crazy when you start looking at droughts. Georgia football, 1980. Tennessee basketball SEC championship, 1979. I mean, when you're talking about drought, sometimes like, you can have that sort of doubt creep in, I guess, when anything kind of starts to happen. Not so much for the players. I think it's overstated how players feel about these sorts of things. Because I just don't think that it doesn't matter to them. Like, what does Josiah care? I mean, what does Vescovy, what can he wear on his chest? I mean, Brendan Huntley Hatfield, what can they wear about the drought? They've been there for a year, 2 years, 3 years. But they hear. I mean, it's more for the fans, like their angst that I guess that could happen. So I watched and I turned it away when it was 14-0, and then I kind of tuned in and checked and there was never a point. It's one of those games that kind of got close, but I never felt like Tennessee was not in control of. I found it true that they kind of used the same lineup for the last 9 minutes of the game. Fulkerson was in there. I feel like Ziegler, Vescovy, James, and Chandler. That's a winning lineup. But I mean, heck, you get a couple TV timeouts in there, but it's like Barnes was just like, this is the lineup that's going to take us home. And you got some hungry guys in that lineup. I mean, heck, who wanted that more than John Fulkerson? And there's something to be said for the want to. And when you're a guy who's been there as long as he has and has been through as many things he's been through, whose role has adjusted so many times throughout the course of his career, there's not going to be a person that wants that more than him. So he deserves to be on the court in that moment. Josiah-Jordan James, a person that is, obviously had, maybe up and down, but however you want to frame it, he's been through things there. And for him to kind of go out, have the big game, I mean, double-double in the title game is huge. Vescovy, that huge sequence. Chandler made so many plays. I mean, like you got a group of guys that it mattered to them to bring it home. Like even guys that didn't even have good games. I mean, we all know that when Tennessee shoots the ball like they did last night or yesterday, they're going to be tough to beat. 12 or 28 is going to win you a lot of games. When you shoot better from 2-point range than you do when you shoot better from 3-point range than you do from 2, which is what they did yesterday, you're going to win a lot of games. And you're going to win a lot of games pretty handily. But also when you hold an A&M team that kind of likes to get some good momentum by hitting, threes, hold them to like 20% from 3, you're going to win a lot of games as well. Like it was a perfect storm for this program to go out and get this win in that fashion, which is it was a little short of dominating, but it was certainly controlled. And again, credit to Rick Barnes, credit to that team, that staff, and those guys for getting the job done, because I'd imagine there were probably times where everybody's like, well, this is going to fall apart. How's it going to fall apart? And they never let that happen yesterday.
Yeah, I think it was Ben McKee of the Swain event who said this first, and I tweeted it out, and then he tweeted it out too, and I gave him credit for it in my tweet. But Tennessee in the SEC tournament, Gene, and the grand total of 120 minutes of game time they played, they trailed for a total of 1 minute 9 seconds for the 120 minutes they played. Like you said, it didn't really feel particularly. None of the games felt dominant. But it was a consistent, okay, we have the lead, we're not going to give it up feeling. I mean, Tennessee led by double digits, I think, in every game. I think they led Kentucky by double digits for a couple of times in that game, but never felt like they were truly running away with it. They were just keeping it out of reach, like the whole, like dangling the meat in front of a dog and make or whatever in front of a horse to make it keep running, like the carrot in front of the horse, like just keep dangling it in front of them, and they keep trying to get it, and they can't get it. It's just out of reach the whole time until finally the buzzer sounds and the game's over. Or until, Tennessee was able to pull away enough against A&M, for example, or pull away enough against Mississippi State, for example. It's interesting. It's just interesting to me to see the growth of this team. And there's another point I heard from someone that mentioned, you never wish a player to get injured. And you never like when guys get hurt. But it almost feels like when Olivier Camwa went down, like forcing Rick Barnes or forcing the team to play those younger guys, forcing Jonas Adu into action, forcing Huntley Hatfield into more action, and saying, okay, it's now or never. Like, you got to put up or shut up. You're just put up or shut up. You're never going to play if you don't play now. That seemed to really help. Like, that seemed to kind of find a different, I guess, depth to this team that if Camwa's in there, I don't know that they ever find it, but I also don't know if you maybe need it because Camwa was, he's a really good player. He was developing into, a breakout player for Tennessee this year in the post. But I mean, him going down kind of opened up new avenues and for Tennessee to explore from their bench. And I think this team is, we talked about it all preseason, Gene, talk about, the questions of the post. And also when you get into February, March, how deep are you actually going to be? Do you trust the eighth guy out there that you can, that's on your bench? Do you actually trust him to go in there and do things on the court? And I think Tennessee does. I think they trust their 8 and 9 guys, number 8, number 9, to go out on the court and actually produce and not just go out there to, fill in a minute or two while you're giving the the starter a blow. Like, you actually trust Jonas Adu to go make some defensive plays. You trust Brendan Huntley Hatfield to give you at least effort. Now, he's giving really good effort now. Whether or not he's able to convert on his offensive opportunities is kind of up for question sometimes, but he's actually giving you, a lot of effort and getting some rebounds and being productive. And same thing with John Fulkerson. He's getting rebounds and being productive in a way that he wasn't after the Arizona game for a long time there. So I think this team is just, they've embraced their roles. And I think that's the biggest thing. I feel like you mentioned that specifically about, I think, Bescovy or some, I can't remember. There's some game, I remember you saying, Gene, that it felt like they'd embraced their roles. And I think that's a perfect way of talking about this team. It feels like they've all kind of said, okay, this is my role. I can go outside if I need to, but this is kind of what I'm supposed to be doing for the team. And it seems like it's got them clicking on, maybe not on all cylinders, but it's got them clicking on enough cylinders to be a really dangerous team to face right now.
So every season's new. And what happens is, you go out and you find the best sort of collection of talent that you possibly can and try to see what you can do, to make your team as competitive as possible. So we look back at the 18-19 team that this team is kind of being, there's been some similarities along the way between that team and this team. But you look at that team and you look just how the pieces just kind of fit together. Then you go to the 19-20 team, those pieces never fit. Last year they were kind of top heavy, but they weren't all that good in the grand scheme of things. I know they won a lot of games, but it was kind of a mismatched roster where you had some guys that you were having to play a lot of extra time. Urosh hadn't developed what he is now. Olivier was still just kind of just running around. You had the kid at Cal State Fullerton or whatever, and the Siki or wherever he's at now. You had guys like that who just couldn't really help this team. And so when you put this roster together this year, there's no way of knowing whether or not this is going to work. I mean, you look at the questions that surround the roster. What are they going to do for an interior presence? What are they going to do at this thing? Are the freshman point guards? They usually struggle in March. See Ziegler yesterday, hit some shots, also had 6 turnovers. Chandler's had his issues. I mean, obviously no turnovers yesterday in 37 minutes. So you kind of look around and you're like, okay, will these pieces fit? And they're going to get enough shooting. How good is Powell going to be? It's a great addition. Hasn't worked out that way. Huntley Hatfield, man, it's going to be the next E. Pons. E. Pons on steroids. Hasn't worked out that way. Although he's obviously developed into a pretty solid player as we've gone on. What's Josiah going to be? Josiah is starting to play a lot better over the past few weeks. Mm-hmm. So you never necessarily know how the pieces are going to fit. It's why it's just important to kind of get the best collection of talent. Again, I don't care about rankings. I don't care what they are. What's the best collection of talent that, that helps these pieces come together as a team? And what people are seeing now is these pieces have come together. Like I think what works is that there's no pride with these freshman bigs. There's no pride in any of the freshmen. Like, it's not, a lot of guys come in and they're like, oh yeah, I got to get my numbers. I got to, they'll look over, well, man, I need to be getting those Kentucky numbers. I need to be getting those numbers like this guy. Or those Duke guys, man, they're putting up numbers. This one and done guy over here, he's putting numbers up. And I think the best part is like, those guys have just kind of figured out how they can be successful by just doing what they do best. You've got Chandler, you've got Huntley Hatfield, you've got Adu, you've got Z. I mean, it's not often that you get a kid who's as, highly regarded coming into college as Adu, who basically spends half the season on the bench. Mm-hmm. The first time that we actually realized, oh, this kid may be decent, was that second Kentucky game. That's the first time that he really kind of jumped out. I mean, there may have been some flashes and moments here and there. There was a practice video of him, blocking shots and showing his range off. But the first time we really saw what he could do, and that doesn't typically happen when you're talking about top 30, top 20, top 30 freshmen, because they've got to, they come in and they want to play. They want to play, and so like that's made the job. I mean, and you have more veteran presence, and so as like John Fulkerson and Josiah and Vescovy and guys like that who've been around for a while. I'll throw Victor Bailey in there too. I mean, regardless of his production, I mean, like the kid is he's a good teammate. He's not out there pouting at the end of the bench when he's playing 1 minute like he did yesterday. Mm-hmm. He's out there, waving the towel like everybody else. Urosh, another great example of what happens when you have young guys who may not know any better, but they just kind of just fit into the status quo of, look, man, we're not about all that other stuff. We're about just, these pieces coming together because this is our year. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 weeks, but I know that if you are a Tennessee basketball fan or just a Tennessee fan in general, you have a lot of reason to be happy with what has transpired because this team has figured its roles out. This team is playing its best basketball, and I think it's going to have an opportunity to prove itself over these next 3 weeks.
Absolutely. And you're talking about Josiah-Jordan James and just his play. And obviously, again, Kennedy Chandler won the tournament MVP, and I think he absolutely deserved it. He had in the 3 games, he totaled 15 assists and 3 turnovers. Like that is elite point guard play, especially this time of year. 15 and 3. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. That's exceptional. That is, again, elite point guard play from Tennessee. And you mentioned Ziegler too, that he struggled, but he made some shots, but he absolutely struggled with turnovers and stuff during the tournament. But he did at least make some shots kind of when it was important to make them. But he didn't have a great tournament overall. Josiah did. I'm looking at counting the tournament, looking at just kind of his last 6 games, which have all been wins for Tennessee. He's averaging 14.5 points, 7.2 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.3 blocks in his last 6 games, and he's making 51.6% of his three-pointers, which is insane, and also making basically 82% of his free throw attempts in that time as well. 51.6% of his threes, Gene, and he's not just attempting like 1 or 2 per game. I'm looking at the last 6 games. He went 2 for 4 against Auburn, 3 of 7 against Georgia, 2 of 3 against Arkansas. And in the SEC tournament, he was 4 of 6 against Mississippi State, 2 of 4 against Kentucky, and 3 of 7 against A&M. Like his offensive output has been just phenomenal. And again, it isn't like you expect him. You're not expecting him. He doesn't have to go out and score 15, 16, 20 points in a game. But if he gives you that, if he's consistently giving you 13 to 16 points in a game, along with his defense, along with what he does that doesn't even show up on the stat sheet, along with getting 7-8 rebounds in a game, and again, he'll get a couple steals here and there and block a shot or two, but other things he does that does not show up on the stat sheet, he's the huge X factor. I mean, Kennedy Chandler in the point guard play for Tennessee has elevated them to another level. And I think that's part of the reason why Josiah has been able to elevate his game to a different level too, is because he's got a legit point guard, or point guards even in some cases, being able to run the offense, being able to do other things to help free him up to be a more productive player. And he's been more aggressive. Yes, he's been shooting really well from 3, but also looking at his 2-point field goal attempt numbers too. And he's been attempting, for the most part, more 2s than 3s, which was not the case earlier in the year for him. And that's a big case you and I talked about, multiple times on this podcast, about he needs to be more aggressive. He needs to stop just settling for 3s and actually put up some 2s. Because I'm looking at earlier in the year, there were, 4, 5, 6, I think 6 or 7 games in the first 15 games this season that Tennessee played where he didn't attempt a single 2-point shot. And he'd put up, excluding the Vanderbilt game where he played 4 minutes, but he would put up 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 3-point attempts in those games. And he wasn't making very many of them because, again, defenses weren't respecting him and were able to, just able to defend him and as one-dimension play. Now he's multi-dimensional, and it's also showing in his elevated free throw attempt numbers. He's attempting a lot more free throws now per game than he was earlier in the year too. So he to me, as Kennedy Chandler deserved the MVP of the tournament in my opinion, but I think really real and truly the X factor has been Triple J. It has been Josiah-Jordan James, and his uptick in his play has been one of the biggest reasons why Tennessee has elevated their play. And I think that not to belabor the point too much, but I think he's a real integral piece to this puzzle moving forward for Tennessee as we transition into the next topic, moving ahead into March. And you can add a little bit more there if you want to, Gene, but We'll move into the tournament topic. You can add a little bit more about Josiah or anybody else you want to before we move into it.
Yeah, so I was just gonna make one little weird analogy. I don't know when we
What?
were kids.
I always like your analogies, Gene. So go ahead.
So when we were kids, you're in elementary school, middle school, or even high school. Every summer you would go through the same process. Right before the new school year started, everybody would go get new clothes. So on the first day of school, everybody wanted to show off their new outfits. And I liken that to Josiah shooting because that's a kid who put a ton of time in the off season working on this three. I mean, I got news flash to everybody. Like, it's not like he just started working on his 3-pointer like during the season and he got in and all of a sudden he's hitting it. This kid put in an amazing, a ridiculous amount of work. I don't know how much work, but I can tell. He put in a tremendous amount of work to get better at that part of his game. So the season starts. And so, of course, he's like, hey, man, it's first day of school, baby. Get these shots up. And he wasn't hitting. And then people started doing the self-check thing where they just basically would turn their back every single time he would get the ball. And so, of course, he'd go through a little frustrating time. And, but I think, it's a case where you got guys who, a lot of guys will get, they'll figure out guys who can do a lot of different things on the basketball court. Some people can just walk on the court and just start shooting like threes, like anytime, anywhere. Justin Powell is kind of that person. It doesn't matter. You put him in at 10 minutes ago at 9:54. If he's had open shot, it's going to let that thing fly. Other guys kind of need to maybe see the ball go in a couple times, maybe make some layups or whatever. And it seems like that's kind of what Josiah is. I mean, now he's in everything. Like, I mean, I think it was the third or fourth possession. He hit that three from the corner, and you could kind of see where this game was going. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and like, look, the only difference between Josiah now and at any point in his career, and specifically the past couple of years, or the last year, is that he's hitting shots. It's the only difference. Everything else is still the same. Mm-hmm. He's still guarding, other team's best players. He's still grabbing rebounds. He's still look at the other stats of his. I don't know. I'm not looking at them. I don't have them up. But I guarantee that there's not much difference between his other stats, the non-shooting stats now, and his early seasons. Maybe the assist numbers, maybe a little bit down, because he's not as much. His usage isn't as high as it used to be. Maybe his rebounds, maybe a little bit more, maybe up a little bit. I don't know. Again, I'm not here to. I don't know that, but I'm saying the only difference is the fact that guys starting to hit shots now, and the confidence that he's playing with. Look, it's no wonder that kid's always smiling now because he's got reason to. Because like that's. Everybody stared at that star ranking and, crucified. Again, I'm talking to coaches, man. I got a coach friend of mine that's like blowing my phone up. I think it's the first LSU game, the one down in Baton Rouge. And he's just talking about how sorry this guy is. And I'm just like, look, man, he's got to figure out some stuff, but he's better than you think. No, I don't care. I know all about the counting stats. I don't care. 5-star player. And I saw him actually on Saturday or yesterday do a mea culpa because he's like, I was hard on him. He's playing. He can play. I'm like, yeah. And, it's like it takes people different amounts of time to figure stuff out. The guy that I've seen the past few weeks is a pro. What level? I don't know those details. Can't say. But a guy who can shoot 35, 40% from three, at his size, he still has a pretty good handle. He may be, I think he still struggles to finish at the rim, but mid-range jump shots and all this, that, and the other. That's a guy that can play for money. And I'm glad to see it happen. But it'll be interesting to see just kind of what happens as we go forward. They've got an easier sort of contest. I kind of let you set it up, but it looks like they've got I don't want to say a layup, because something this time of year is a layup on the men's side. Against a Longwood team that's never been to this tournament before. And we'll see just kind of how they kind of prepare for this sort of battle.
Yeah, real quick, you were absolutely right about Josiah's numbers and how they're basically the same in other categories other than his points per game. Because you look at his rebounds, he's averaging 5.9 on the year. Previous 2 years were 5.5 and 6.5. 1.7 assists, which you're right, they're down from 2.9 his first year and 2 last year. Steals are 1.5. They were basically 1 and 1.4. Blocks is 1.1 and basically 1 and 1 for the last 2 years. So, I mean, yeah, everything else is, again, like you said, across the board, pretty much the same as they were. That's just what is on the stat sheet. But his points per game went from 7.4 his first year to 8 last year. Now he's almost there at 10 points per game. He's averaging 9.9 points per game now. So he's almost averaging double figures in points, and a very good chance he does that. Gets that mark in the NCAA tournament. You mentioned it, Gene. I'm going to go ahead and transition into it. Tennessee is a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. So before we kind of get the matchup, I do want to touch on this a little bit. I wasn't shocked. Like, I genuinely was not shocked. I saw it coming from a mile away. I knew Vol fans were getting their hopes up for a 2 seed, and I thought, I don't think it's going to happen. It'd be nice if it does, but I fully expected Tennessee to get, I mean, honestly, disrespected and not get the 2 seed, because when I talked with Eric Haslam of Haslametrics on a podcast last week, if you haven't listened to it yet, you can go back and listen and hear what I'm talking about. We talked about that. He mentioned that, he's been doing this, I think, for 6-7 years of just kind of doing the bracketology and stuff. He's been following college basketball, for decades. But that from what he knew about the selection committee and the conversations he'd had about it with people and all this different stuff with the NCAA and everything, with the selection committee stuff, that they basically have things kind of locked in seating wise by the Fridays, like by sometime Friday afternoon, in end of the day, Friday, whatever, of that weekend, or like going into that selection Sunday weekend, they basically have most of the things locked in, except for, unless there's a surprise automatic qualifier that they weren't expecting. That kind of changes things a little bit, but for the most part, there isn't too much switching around in your top, really 4, I guess like top 4 seeds for each region, like the top 16, teams, whatever. There's not really a whole lot of switching around. And that made me think, so even if Tennessee wins this SEC tournament, which at that time I didn't have a whole lot of high hopes for, but that made me think, so even if they get the SEC tournament victory, they're locked in as a 3 seed. And that's basically what Haslam said. He said, I think Tennessee's locked in as a 3 seed. Could they move up to a 2 with an SEC tournament victory? Maybe, but I don't. He's like, even then, I don't think they move up, because he says, I think you're looking at who's locked in as a 1. You're going to have a couple teams lose as a 2, and it's going to be one of the bottom teams, and that just didn't really happen for Tennessee. But Gene, before we kind of talk about the bracket and Tennessee's draw here as the 3rd seed in the South, the biggest point of contention for Vol fans and for me too is the fact that Duke got a 2 seed, and Duke not only got a 2 seed, but they got it in the Greenville, South Carolina region of the West, or excuse me, of the West. I mean, granted, they did draw Gonzaga as the 1 seed, so if they keep advancing, they're going to play Gonzaga. I don't think Duke's good enough to beat Gonzaga, but Duke is clearly where they're placed at. They're the weakest number 2, and Tennessee's not even as the top 3 seed. I guess if you're going to look at it that way, the top 3 seed would be Purdue, which I think makes sense. Purdue's been a pretty darn good team this year, but I think the biggest point of contention for Vol fans was that, how is Duke a 2 when you look at every single metric? And I agree with this. I made the same point in the live stream. When it comes to rankings, when it comes to strength of schedule, when it comes to your record against those top 25 teams, or record and the quad 1 victories and whatnot, like Tennessee had Duke beat in every category. It felt like, whether it's true or not, it felt like the committee was doing this as a Coach K farewell tour. Let's give him a spot in Greenville as a 2 seed. Whether that's true or not, like I don't know about that. Like I'm not huge in conspiracy theories, but it does feel that way. And it is Duke, and it is Coach K, who's been around for forever. But even still, my whole point, even with saying that, yeah, I agree Tennessee got disrespected, but I did not care heading into the 6 o'clock hour of the selection Sunday. I didn't care if Tennessee was a 2 seed, a 3 seed, a 6 seed, or what. All I wanted for Tennessee was a favorable draw in the bracket, and I kind of think they got it. They could have gotten a lot worse of a bracket, Gene. So we'll get into that in a second. But I will say that it really doesn't matter a great deal what your seed is. And in fact, Tennessee getting at least a 3 seed here, not like they got a 4 where they had to play potentially the 1 seed in the Sweet 16. They're going to play 2 seed, which will be a rematch, and it's not going to be an easy one if Tennessee gets there. Most likely, again, weird things happen in the tournament all the time, but it's more about your draw and more about the matchups you have in your bracket. And I think Tennessee got a pretty decent, like if I'm involved fans, like, yeah, be upset and say, the selection committee, whatever, they did Tennessee wrong. Tennessee got disrespected. And yeah, I think they did. But that's just another thing for this team to wear another chip on its shoulder. Get motivated. If do the whole Nick Saban thing. We talked about on this podcast before, Gene. You talked about it with, I think you mentioned Saban before multiple times, or other teams saying, hey, man, take this as disrespect. I mean, if anything else, just motivates you more to go out and say, hey, look at what we did here. We just went and won the SEC tournament. We've won 7 in a row. We've beaten some really good top 20 teams in those 7 games, and you still didn't want to rank us a better than a 3 seed and not even the number 1 3 seed. Okay, we'll just go prove you wrong again. We'll go and show why we should have been ranked higher. So I looked at it as, yeah, they get disrespected. It didn't shock me, but also I think the draw is okay, and also go prove them wrong. Just go, wear the chip on your shoulder and say, hey, have that attitude of the don't pick us type of thing you did a couple years ago, which I know didn't work out in the long run because Tennessee got bounced in the second round. But again, I will take this to my grave as believing this. If Kyle Alexander didn't get hurt in that game, Tennessee wins against Loyola Chicago. But, Gene, your thoughts?
So I think the bigger, we talked about this before the podcast started, but I do think I don't think the difference between a 2-seater, I think the number is something that is pretty, if you're talking 2 and 3, it's pretty obligatory. I mean, you want it to matter because you want to feel respected. I get that, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, if the seeds hold up, the only difference between you and what Villanova's 2 seed is the jerseys that you wear. If you were the 2 seed and Villanova was the 3 seed and the seeds hold up, and I don't think they're going to hold up because I think that I think UTC is going to crash this party with back-to-back wins because Seth Davis said they're going to the Sweet 16, so why should I believe that? But if the seeds do hold up, am I right there that the 3 seed is Villanova? I'm sorry, the Tennessee's the 3 and Villanova's the 2.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then yeah, the only difference is the colored jersey you wear. It's it. It's the only difference. I mean, I understand it, and I understand that some fans have gotten their hopes up, and you got writers that are out here saying they should be a 1 seed, they should be a 1 seed, they should be 1 seed. You're probably right. It would be my response to that. You're probably right, but there was never a time when anybody had ever talked about that happening. Nobody had ever talked about Tennessee being a 1 seed ever. And I'm not saying that they should. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm saying they had never done it. It's kind of like the whole Lenardi conversation yesterday. Look, man, the dude's a bad messenger. It's that simple. He's a bad messenger. He needs to just be quiet.
Yeah.
But he's literally taking his cues from the committee. And it's like they're shuffling him out there like Roger Goodell, like the commission. Like all the NFL owners do Roger Goodell and say, hey, take all the bullets for us while we run up and hide in the corner. And that's kind of what I felt like happened with Lenardi yesterday. Like, he's a bad messenger. He didn't get the message across properly, but he was literally out here just speaking for the committee and saying Tennessee won't go above a 3 seed. Everybody's yelling it, and you have analysts that are yelling all this stuff. Yeah, they should be a 2. They should be a 2. Analysts aren't part of that committee. And is that an issue? Perhaps. Is it an issue that Tennessee should have been a 2 seed? Perhaps. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You've got to win 6 games. The biggest issue is figure out how to get by Longwood.
Yep.
Figure out how to get by Loyola. Figure out how to get by Villanova if that's the case. Figure out how to get by, who am I forgetting? The 1 seed.
Arizona. Figure those things out. Because you're going to have to play those teams. Look, I've seen all the discussions on social media about, man, we should get rid of the conference tournaments. Well, maybe we should have those conversations all across the board where you have, if you want to have that conversation, let's talk. Nobody seems to care about those conference tournaments when UTC's hit an amazing shot. He did an amazing shot to go in at the buzzer just to make the tournament, even though they were the 1 seed in their own conference. And those 18 games would have been rendered meaningless if that shot, goes any other way, if that shot does not go in.
I mean, like we can't just sit here and change rules because it didn't benefit Tennessee in this one case. And if we're going to have that discussion, how about we have a conversation about Texas A&M?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because what did it matter for them? Like, A&M fans are like, y'all are mad because what? You're a 3 instead of a, because you may have to wear orange jerseys as opposed to white in the Sweet 16. What about us? We knocked off everybody. We knocked off two top 15. I don't know rankings. I don't really pay attention to the top 25
They're at
polls.
least top
But
20. Yeah.
we knocked off the number 1 seed in the SEC tournament and the number 4 seed in the SEC tournament. 4 games in 4 days to get to this point, and it didn't matter. In a conference that's either number 1 or number 2, depending on what metric between them and the Big Ten, which I think is slightly overrated because they're typically always slightly overrated. Get past Michigan State and show me a team. Michigan's made some runs, but no anything to show for it. But slightly overrated Big Ten because all the writers are Midwestern writers, and so they push them all up and pump them up all year. Whereas SEC is a football conference, so therefore during football season, the SEC gets all the push. It is what it is. But yeah, I mean, I get it. Like it's disappointing. You wanted to have that nice fat 2 next to your name. You got a 3. Doesn't change anything, man. Like if you are what we think you are, you'll show it. And it's that simple to me. If you are what we think you are as a program, if we think you're quote unquote Final Four good, national championship good, then you'll prove it over these next 2-3 weeks. Because if you want to, I mean, it's a pretty bad argument to sit there and say, well, we lost in the Sweet 16 because we were a 3 seed, not a 2. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Nope. Yeah.
It doesn't. You're going to have to win 6 regardless. You're going to have to win 6. So how about we just go out there, enjoy this process because it's not, there's a lot of teams that aren't getting this sort of opportunity. And if you want to get caught up in the little small details, minute details, it is what it is. But Lenardi and those guys were pretty much telling you were just telling them that he was stupid because Jerry Palm put you as a 2 seed or whatever. I mean, look, these guys, we like them or not, they've been doing it for a pretty long time. They're pretty solid at what they do. So maybe we should kind of take their word for a lot of this stuff because I don't think Lenardi missed on many, if any, of the teams. I don't think he missed on many, if any, of the teams. He may have missed, obviously, placements, but he was pretty much on everything else.
Like you said, he's been doing it long enough. He has connections. Like he talks to people. He's not just doing it based off of his own opinion. He's doing it based off of other things. And it's like you said, he's a bad messenger, and maybe he doesn't need to talk all the time. But hey, let's talk about the actual bracket, Gene. Let's talk about Tennessee's actual draw because I do kind of want to look at the bracket as a whole because I think it's just a weird bracket for Tennessee when you look at this season and kind of recent history in terms of potential rematches. But let's look at who Tennessee's playing first, and that is Longwood, who when I first saw that, I was thinking, I was like, is that a team from California? No, it's a team from Virginia, apparently. I did some research on them on Sunday, and then also talked about them a little bit in the live stream. Gene, their head coach, just like not even a decade ago, wasn't even in college basketball. He was a guy who graduated from Virginia Law, who was a chief financial officer, who started a multi-million oil and gas company, and then I think he had started some kind of high school youth league stuff. He had ties to people who were in coaching and stuff, and then he was named an assistant coach on for UMBC, and then a couple years later they go and shock the world and beat Virginia, and then he gets named the head coach at Longwood. That is one of the, before we get into detail of the team, that is one of the weirdest coaching stories I've ever heard. A guy who was a CFO at one point for an oil and gas company is now a head coach for a program that had one winning season since they joined Division I, 20 years ago, and he has led them to their best season in program history by far. That is just such a weird and kind of cool, honestly. If Tennessee wasn't playing Longwood, I'd be rooting for him. I would like to see them make a run. But it's such a weird and kind of cool story to have as a guy who is a CFO, is now a coach, and has led his team to a 26-6 record and 15-1 in the Big South.
What was Brad Stevens? Wasn't that similar to him?
I think you're right. I'm looking up what he was because
I know
he
he was
wasn't in
out
coaching
of
before, but for a
yeah,
while, yeah.
but it's similar. Regardless, I mean, but yeah, like so there's a kid from my hometown that was at he spent a little time at Longwood. This is long before. They've got a kid there now who transferred from UTC. So and he's not. I think he's sitting this year. I don't know either that or he should stop playing. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I'm a little bit familiar with Longwood only because of that. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, I felt like they were D2 at some point, maybe. I
Yeah,
feel like
they were
maybe when
D2
I
like 20 years
was
ago. Yeah.
yeah, when I said we scrimmaged them when I was in Carson, and I remember that. I just, yeah, and but they're a good story.
Mhm.
We'll see how good of a team they actually are because I don't know much about like who they played, but they played the games they had to. But the unfortunate thing about some of these leagues is what happens is with all of the conference realignment and stuff, I don't know who's where. So I don't know. I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm like, okay, well, is there a win? Like they lost by 11 to a Western Carolina team that I saw. Now that Western Carolina team split with UTC, but I mean that was not a good team. That UTC team checked out of the first game and up there, and then beat them by like 20 back at home. I'm just glancing at their roster. That's not a good league.
No,
Yeah,
no,
I
no,
think how.
no.
Yeah, I mean, like yeah, it's good for them. Maybe you kind of get me on the fact that in the championship game, let me check here. Yeah, you get me on the fact that they beat Winthrop by 20 something in the championship game, and DJ Burns, former Vol, had
Yep.
14 points in that game, and I'm pretty sure DJ Burns was conference player of the year. So
I think he was.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that I saw that he was conference player of the year. So beating them by 20, I don't know how good they are, but I'm pretty sure Winthrop's got a new coach. Yeah, they got the guy from Western Carolina, ironically, I believe. So I don't know. I mean, like I'm sitting here looking at this, yeah, because I'm seeing some Western Carolina players. Um, yeah, they're a good story. They're not a team. They're not quite like the sort of team that I think can compete in March. Like it's a big day. Yesterday was a big day for them. Getting a 14 seed is better than there's some 15s to 16. So you're not like you got a small amount of respect from the committee, enough to where they didn't slap a 16 on you and sing you to Dayton tomorrow night.
Hmm.
But I don't expect this to be a game. I mean, like I said, it's a nice story. It's a nice situation for them and great accomplishment for what they're trying to do. But I don't see this ending in any way other than a Tennessee victory.
The way I said it on the live stream I did on Sunday is that they're a pretty good, like they're actually a really good Big South team. Like they handle their business in the Big South. But then when you remember who some of those Big South teams are, Tennessee played a couple of them this year, Gene. See if you remember anything about these. USC Upstate and Presbyterian, two teams that Tennessee smashed. And I'm talking about like they held USC Upstate to 36 points, which was the lowest amount of points a Tennessee opponent had scored against Tennessee in the shot clock era. So that's to your point, that's the conference that Longwood's coming from. And they did their business, handled their business in their conference, went 15-1 and won the tournament there to get the automatic qualifier. But Tennessee against Big South teams this year, I mean, that was back in the early season before this team gelled and became what they are now. Like there's a, I hate to say minuscule because this is March, but there's a very small chance that Tennessee loses this game. Like it just is what it is. And I'm not going to, y'all can't blame me for jinxing because I said a small chance. I gave Longwood a chance to beat Tennessee. So you can't blame me if the unthinkable happens in this game on Thursday at 2:45 Eastern. But Longwood's, they're a good story. Like you said, their first time ever getting into the NCAA tournament. I'd be interested to see how many like teams their first time ever in the tournament they actually won, their first game ever, because it hasn't happened. I feel like it happened somewhat recently, but again, this isn't the type of team I think that's built for to pull off an upset against a caliber of a Tennessee, especially. They do shoot the ball really well from three. I will absolutely give them that. They are average. They're shooting 38% from three this year, Gene, which is 18th in the country. and so that they can actually shoot the three ball really well. But they don't have size. And I said this in the live stream too. None of their guys who play consistent minutes are taller than 6'7". And again, Tennessee is not some gigantic team, but Tennessee's gonna be able to beat them with their length and height like easy. And even Josiah-Jordan James, who's 6'6", like he's gonna be as big as their biggest guys. They have a 6'7", 225 forward, a 6'7", 215 forward, and a guard forward, I guess, who's listed at 6'7", 210. Like Josiah is as big, if not bigger than all those guys. And then you also throw in the fact you have Huntley Hatfield, you have Fulkerson, you have Urosh, you have Adu, who are all taller than those guys and probably more athletic than most of them too. I just don't see them giving Tennessee too much problem. Can they come out and hit some threes early on, especially, and make it a little bit, a little too close for comfort at some points? I absolutely think they can. But this isn't a team that I think is built to pull off an upset against the 3 seed like Tennessee, especially. So again, I think they're good. They're a fun story, a good Big South team, but Tennessee has just dominated the Big South teams they've played this year. And again, that was back in like November and December. So now we're in March, where Tennessee's playing a lot better, and they're going to be motivated, I think, to go out there and try to prove people wrong about being a 3 seed. So Gene, let's look ahead a little bit here. Let's look at the South bracket that Tennessee's in. For one, your Chattanooga Mocs, the team you cover, Gene, is in there. So I think it's really cool. They play Illinois, and you and I were talking before we start recording here. I actually think that's going to be an up. I think Chattanooga wins that game. Like I really do. Illinois is not as good this year as people I think expect them to be. They're still not a bad team, but I think Chattanooga has some legit just weapons on that team that I'm very glad Tennessee didn't get matched up with them. I'm glad they weren't a 14 seed. I'm glad that they get the 13. I thought maybe they could get a 12, but I'm glad Tennessee's not facing them. I would not want to face UTC in the first round. But anyway, so you're looking at kind of just the bracket in general. You have 2 teams that Tennessee faced already this year as the 2 seeds that are ahead of you. Arizona's the 1 and Villanova is the 2. You look in the same little, I guess, portion of the bracket, the region where Tennessee is in that bracket. And if Tennessee beats Longwood, which they should, they'll play the winner of Colorado State, Michigan, which I fully expect to be Colorado State because I don't think Michigan deserved to get in. But if it is Michigan, Gene, that's a rematch of the 2014 Sweet 16 that all fans remember, that controversial block charge call against Jarnell Stokes that went against Tennessee, and Tennessee lost that game. You also have, if for whatever reason, Loyola Chicago and Ohio State play, those both have ties to Tennessee. Loyola Chicago is the team that bounced Tennessee from the tournament in 2018. They'd have to play Villanova most likely, but it's anything can happen in March, and Tennessee can match up potentially with them in the Sweet 16, or they could potentially match up with an Ohio State in the Sweet 16, who Tennessee's played twice in the tournament in the Bruce Pearl days, and once against Greg Oden and them and those guys, and what's his face, Evan Turner. Was Aaron Kraft on one of those teams? No, never mind. But that was back in the mid 2000s when Tennessee played them and blew that lead in the Sweet 16, and they almost got to the Elite Eight, and then they did play them, I think, again to get to the Elite Eight. Man, if I can't remember, they played them twice. I remember, I think, unless I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, there's still a tie there. Like in the last 15 years, Tennessee's played Ohio State in the NCAA tournament. It had a pretty memorable, game against them. And again, you already have Arizona and Villanova, who Tennessee played this season. Like it's just interesting to me. Like I know the committee didn't know all that stuff. Like they knew none of that. And they didn't do anything of that with any of that mind, except maybe Arizona and Villanova. I don't know. But didn't know the other historical stuff with Michigan and Ohio State and Loyola Chicago or whatever. But it's just such a interesting bracket because I think Tennessee matches up really well with a lot of teams on their side of it. And I think Tennessee, with the rematch, potentially, of Villanova in the Sweet 16, which again, that's assuming we get chalk, which I feel like we will, because I think Tennessee and Villanova are just better than the other teams that they could potentially be playing in the first 2 rounds to get to that Sweet 16. Tennessee's a better team than they were when oh my goodness. When these 2 teams first played, there we go. Tennessee's a better team than they were then. Kenny Chandler is definitely a better point guard than he was back then. I kind of like Tennessee's chances in that rematch, but I don't know if I like Tennessee's chances in the rematch with Arizona. They won that one, obviously, in Thompson Bowling in Knoxville, and that was a huge crowd in that game. But Gene, overall, I think this is not a bad bracket for Tennessee to be in. I think there's a legitimate, definite shot and like a really pretty decent shot at getting to the Elite Eight. That Final Four, it would be better, in my opinion, for Tennessee if Arizona got upset before they had to play them. I don't know that it'll happen because Arizona will, I think, easily win their first game. Then they'll play either Seton Hall and TCU, which probably will beat that one. And then, Gene, I think they have a good shot of playing Chattanooga in the Sweet 16. I honestly really do. It's either going to be them or Houston or UAB, I think, because I really do think Chat wins against Illinois. But I think Arizona's going to make it to the Elite Eight. And Tennessee, I think, is one of the few 3 seeds I think it's getting picked, I think, on par or maybe even more so than the 2 seed in the region to get to the Elite Eight. I think if this team gets to the Elite Eight, that I had someone ask me in the live stream, is that considered a disappointment? And I would say no. It's your second ever Elite Eight as a program. Like that's the furthest you've ever made it as a program. You got there with this team. I would take that. Like I would 100% take that, especially if you lose to the 1 seed. Like if you lose to a 5 seed or a 13 seed, if Chattanooga gets that far, Gene, that's a different story. But if you lose to the 1 seed in Arizona in the Elite Eight, like that's not a disappointment to me. Like that is, you got as far as your program has ever gotten, and then you ran into one of the top 4 teams in the country. Like that's not a disappointment to me. So this is just such an interesting bracket because, again, I know Vol fans are upset about not being a 2 seed, and I understand that, and I agree with you. I think they had the resume to be a 2 seed, but your draw in that South region isn't bad, and Villanova is a good 2 seed, but there's some better. Like I mean, they're not one of the most. I guess most the 2 seeds I've had the most fear about in my life, like thinking back to the NCAA tournaments of years past. Like they're a really good 2 seed, don't get me wrong. 2 seeds this year are weird. Kentucky and Auburn both are 2 seeds. I don't know. I don't feel great about any of the 2 seeds this year. Duke is a 2 seed, and again, we know how I feel about them. Nova's probably the one I feel the most like confidence in, but they have to run into one of the best 3 seeds, in my opinion, in Tennessee. So like it's just such an interesting bracket in the South region that I think Tennessee has a legit shot of getting to the Elite Eight, and they actually have an okay shot of getting to the Final Four. And I feel crazy for saying that, but this team did just win the SEC tournament, and that hasn't happened in 43 years. Can this team, Gene, go do something that Tennessee's never ever done before and get to the Final Four? They can. I don't know if they will, though, but they are more equipped to do that than probably any Tennessee team I've seen in my lifetime, at least.
So at some point, the luck has to work out in favor of UTC. I'm sorry, DC, of Tennessee. Like so many things historically have happened. I mean, with like some really quality teams. But look, man, like this time of year is 40. I'd say about 50% skill and 50% luck.
Oh yeah,
because you can't determine anything that happens in any of these other games that don't involve you. So, no, the Loyola thing in 26?
18.
I'm sorry. Sorry, it's got some news. Some assistant is leaving Tennessee. I don't know. You'll have to probably look into that.
We have some breaking news to cover here on the podcast.
Something. But, at some point, the luck has to work out in favor of Tennessee. The shot has to fall. The foul has to not be called. The shot can't get blocked. Some kid off the bench can't go 3-point crazy. Like with the things that have transpired, at some point it has to work out in your favor. Like things, and look, in the SEC tournament, things worked out in Tennessee's favor. Auburn has kind of been a kryptonite in the tournament. They get beat by Texas A&M. So at some point, this is the year that some things work out in favor of Tennessee, because it usually doesn't. And I'm not talking about the draw; it doesn't matter. I'm specifically talking about like maybe the brackets, like maybe UTC or UAB or somebody knocks Arizona out before they get to the Elite Eight. Maybe you put together a great performance and you're able to beat Villanova in the round of 16. Maybe you get past Loyola or whoever the other seed is in that Ohio State in that 17 game. At some point things have to work out in your favor. If you can be, Like this stuff isn't about who is the best team. Like college basketball and college football are so, just different in how they go about it. The postseason is just, unless you're playing the college football playoff, I don't really care. I mean, I guess, fans care about their particular team. But I'm not watching the college football playoff. I don't really care. I mean, I may tune in for a few minutes. I'm not watching bowl games. I don't care. Um, Whereas a lot of people have that same approach towards regular season college basketball games. Um, but like their season, like so much is being put into this part where it's a lot more about luck because of things that are outside of your control. You can, you're going up against the sorts of teams that may have a style that you're not accustomed to. Say Tennessee was a play at UTC. UTC's got 3 Power 5 level bigs as a mid-major that they can throw at them. Like that's 3 good, like different, but sort of players. I don't know if, maybe Kentucky's kind of close, but they're not even like that this year. They're not built that way. Who has Tennessee faced that is just like big, heavy, but also has really good guards? I'm trying to think. I don't know.
I don't know either.
That's why you try to play different sorts of teams. Like sometimes people ask, well, why are they playing this team? Why are they playing that team? I remember, a lot of people. Yeah, I remember talking to a former UTC coach about scheduling, and he told me he would never schedule Georgia State. This is back when Ron Hunter was the head coach. I'm like, why wouldn't you play Georgia State? It's an hour and a half trip. It's a pretty easy trip. He said because they play a solid defense that we'll never see at any other point during the season. And so like that, you're going to come across different sorts of matchups and teams that do things a different way throughout the course of the season. I'm sorry, in the postseason. Are you prepared for that? How many ways can you win games? And, the questions are still out there about, they'll always be there for me as far as like Tennessee's ability to, when they're not hitting shots, to win games. But look, if they continue to hit shots, we'll never have to answer that question. And that's the beauty of the game of basketball. If you do something so well that nobody can stop it, guess what? You're going to win a lot of games. And right now, Tennessee is shooting the ball so well, they're going to win a lot of games. So I'm looking at a situation now where you've got a Tennessee team that's playing its best basketball. Everything, at some point, things are going to work out in their favor. Like they're playing great basketball. Like I don't see that stopping. The fact that there's only, 7, they play Thursday, so 4 days in between the last game and the next one. Mm-hmm. It's not like you're talking about 2-3 weeks in between games. So you're talking about a team that's hot and wants to keep playing. And so those are the sorts of teams that you can kind of figure out some level of success. I'm not necessarily saying this is UConn in 2010 with Kemba Walker, because you're talking about one just dude who just played amazing for 10 games with the Big East tournament in NCAA. But you have a team of guys who are playing really good basketball now. Like who's playing bad basketball for Tennessee right now that plays? That's kind of a weird thing, but because you're not playing good, but everybody that you're putting in the game, everybody that is playing probably some of the best basketball that anybody has seen them play. Josiah-Jordan James, Kennedy Chandler, Vescovy is always consistent. Fulkerson, is playing really well at times when he gets in. Huntley Hatfield's had some moments. Adu has had some moments. Like everybody that they're pretty much putting in that's playing like quality minutes is producing. Ziegler, like everybody. And that's the sort of team that you don't want to face. We can talk about like these little lower seeded teams, the UTCs of the world. I don't want to face that team. I ain't trying to face Tennessee anywhere. Like I just seeing that team, forget about the seed. I don't want to face that team. And that's a credit to what they've built here. And so I think this is a really good opportunity for them. The next time we sit down and talk about this, I think that we talk about a team in the Sweet 16 that's had 2 quality victories. 2 pretty, I don't want to say easy ones, but 2 pretty solid victories. And look, at this point in the year, just to be sitting down on Monday and get ready to game plan for another opponent, that's a win because there's a lot of teams that'll be going home Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday this week, or Tuesday and Wednesday technically because of those first 4 games. But there's a lot of teams like 48 go home. 48, 50 teams are going home. 52 teams, I'm sorry, 68 to 16.
There you
52
go.
teams will go home. Yeah, I know, finally. We'll go home this weekend. So if we're sitting here next Monday talking about a Tennessee team that is still alive, that's a credit, man. And it's a credit to everything they've done and everything that they'll still have the opportunity to accomplish as we get ready to break down that Tennessee Villanova and UTC Arizona matchups in the Sweet 16.
Ooh. I think I do genuinely think it'll be UTC at least advancing in one round, and I'll be interested to see if they play Houston or UAB, because I think that's a potential upset here. But Gene, you were right. We have some breaking news to talk about here on the podcast. So when you are listening to this, it'll be, I guess, a few hours old. The news will be, but Tennessee, it's a pretty, I don't know, big. Like, I don't say big loss, but it's a noteworthy one. Not super surprising, but Michael Schwartz, Tennessee associate head coach, is tabbed as the next head coach for ECU, the East Carolina men's basketball program, according to Stephen Igoe. I used to know him because when I lived in East Carolina, looked at ECU and stuff over there, and he's a guy who he writes for the 247 board over the hoist the colors for the ECU 247 site. But Stephen Igoe, I'm not sure how you say his last name. But he's agreed to become the next head coach of the Pirates, pending a board of trustees approval on Wednesday. The board is set to meet at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time in the afternoon to approve the contract. He's been as Rick Barnes' top assistant in Tennessee since being elevated to the associate head coach role prior to the 2019 season. He's 45 and has been with the Vols since 2016. He's a native of Los Angeles, which I didn't actually know, but coached at Texas, Long Beach State, UTSA, and Miami, Florida, Fresno State, and Tulsa, along with his time at Tennessee. There's an interesting Tennessee tie here with ECU, by the way. ECU Athletics Director John Gilbert used to oversee the Tennessee men's basketball program during his time with the Volunteers, worked alongside Barnes. So Gilbert and Schwartz crossed paths for 1 year at Tennessee before Gilbert got the Southern Miss AD job. And Gilbert's son, Ken Gilbert, is a sophomore walk-on for the Vols. So a lot of interesting little ties there between ECU and Tennessee. That was also where Dave Hart went for a second. I think he was there for as some sort of AD. Actually, he might have been the actual AD, and then I think he served as some sort of associate AD role there at ECU. So there's a lot of weird connections between ECU and Tennessee over the last few years. But ECU relieved their former head coach Joe Dooley, Dooley, of his duties this past Friday. Dooley, in his second stint with ECU, went 15-15 this past year, marking the first time in 8 years the Pirates program did not have a losing record. So it's interesting that he was relieved of his duties, though. His program overall the last 4 years compiled a 44-67 record, including just a 16-47 mark in the AAC. So their past season 6-11 mark tied for the most wins for the program in the AAC since moving to there in 2014. So it's interesting they let go of Joe Dooley, even though he put up the best year they've had in a while. But hey, I guess you feel like you can make an upgrade, go make an upgrade. And now Michael Schwartz is the latest in now what's becoming a pretty long tree of the Rick Barnes coaching tree. And Gene, this report, and I've tried to find other ones on 3 reported on it too, and a couple other people have mentioned it. I haven't seen anything that's mentioned whether or not Schwartz is going to stay with Tennessee through the NCAA tournament. If the board of trustees is making the decision on Wednesday about it, I don't know. Like that'd be interesting. I don't want to speculate on that too much because I'm sure by the time this podcast is out, we'll know whether or not he is. But that's interesting if he's going to stay with Tennessee or not. And also, this kind of ties in. I wanted to kind of finish out the podcast with some SEC coaching news, and now this happened, so it kind of ties into it still. Do you think to replace Michael Schwartz, Tennessee promotes from within, or do you think they go hire a Frank Martin as an assistant coach, or somebody in that caliber to go be an assistant coach under Rick Barnes? Because we know how Frank Martin rolls with the defense. Rick Barnes and Frank Martin are best buds. I mean, I don't know that, aside from maybe John Calipari, I don't know that anybody loves Rick Barnes more than Frank Martin when it comes to the coaching, fraternity out there. So I don't know. I don't know that that'll happen. Frank Martin could go get a head coaching job somewhere. I don't know that he would take an assistant coaching job. Maybe he will, but it'll be intriguing to see if Tennessee promotes from within, because there's a couple guys. I think the video coordinator is one that pops to mind that could be promoted to an assistant coach. But does Tennessee go from within? Do they go look for a young kind of rising star type of guy like they did with Kim English a couple years ago to kind of try to fill that spot? Or do they go with the savvy veteran and a guy like Frank Martin? I don't know. But this is interesting, Gene. Again, it's not a huge surprise. Michael Schwartz has been a guy who I was kind of surprised he didn't leave maybe last offseason to go get a head coaching job. He seemed like he was destined to go be a head coach sometime soon, and now he gets to join. Also, I didn't say this before, but congrats to Rob Lanier, who is a former Tennessee assistant, who is now the head coach at Georgia State. You got to play Gonzaga in your first game, but hey, congrats on making the tournament nonetheless. But you can join the likes of him, of the likes of Kim English, of oh my goodness, the ETSU. I just forgot who's the head coach there. You can remind me, Gene. But yeah, Des Oliver. He can join the ranks of all of those guys who have been at Tennessee. And there's another one I feel like I'm forgetting that you used to coach here that is now a head coach somewhere. He can join those ranks of guys who coached under Rick Barnes at Tennessee who are now head coaches somewhere. But I'll be very interested to see who Tennessee replaces him with. But again, not a huge surprise that Schwartz is going to be a head coach somewhere at a smaller program.
Right. Well, it was interesting about that to me is what I would have thought. I would have thought that he would have been in play at San Diego.
Yeah,
but
his LA ties.
Yeah, I thought he would have been in play there. I actually thought he was going to be in play at UTC if and when their head coach moves on, because that's obviously when you have the success that he's had, Lamont Paris has had, there will be people talking. I can say, Georgia had reached out, to Lamont. There had been some, I don't know if there was mutual interest, but it was what it was. I think Frank Martin's interesting. I think I heard his name kind of mentioned. Somebody tried to mention his name with, was it UMass maybe? I don't think that makes any sense. But who knows? I mean, like I'd heard his name, mentioned with Miami before they started winning, because obviously he's from there, and so we'll see where Martin ends up. I think he spent a lot of time as a head coach, and it's kind of hard to then take a step back to being an assistant. Especially when you had success. I mean, he had the Final Four a few years ago, and like that's like Schwartz is interesting. I think that's obviously good for him. That's a guy who's been waiting his turn, as guys that he coached with got jobs quicker than he did. And I think the guy you're talking about is Chris. I think he's an assistant at he may be an assistant at Texas now. But I think he was at Texas, UTSA or UTEP. He was their head coach for a little bit. I think.
Let me look up the old Rick Barnes staffs when he first got here, and I'll tell you.
It was one of Ogden.
Yeah, Chris Ogden. There we go. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for him, and we'll see if he stays on, because that's kind of like he's the defensive guy of that staff. Like that's his job. He's the defensive coordinator, and we'll see. And obviously, they've really done a great job on that side this year. Like even when they weren't scoring, like the defense, they've not lost games because of defense. That travels, that carries. They've always done a good job with. I don't know. I don't know enough to really just spitball names. I guess you've got guys who will hop on Barnes' staff because they realize it's an opportunity. We look at some of the previous coaches. Kim English, I think he's going to get a shot. I think he's going to at least get a really good look at Missouri. Obviously he's from there. He's like a legend there, and I don't know if he's done enough at George Mason, but he's obviously recruiting Baltimore very hard, recruited very well, and that could be enough. That could be enough to give him a chance. So, I don't know. It'll depend on what Barnes wants to do with this next hire. Does he want just like a guy who's going to be around? Because the thing is, you're allowed to have, Lanier. I mean, to a lesser extent, Lanier, but you're allowed to have the staff that you have with guys, Beard and Gatlin, guys who are, have a chance to be a head coach in a year or two. You're allowed to have those guys when you have a guy like Schwartz, who has been through everything, like Lanier, who hung around as long as he, could until the right opportunity showed up. You can't have a whole staff of guys who have one foot out the door. And I'm not suggesting that these other guys do, but it just seems more likely I don't know if there's a lifer sort of guy, a guy who will travel with, Barnes from stop to stop to stop. And so I think he's probably going to want to go stability with that next hire. I mean, a guy that he trusts, the Frank Martin thing is interesting there if he wants to take an assistant job for a couple of years. But again, that's the same thing. Like, if you're going to do it for a year or two, that really good? But you don't really know. I guess it's the bigger point. Like, you don't really know like how long you're going to have these guys, the connections they have. I mean, you're talking about the Gilbert connection and all that, and they had the former athletic director. Like, everything has worked itself out for Schwartz to sit back. I don't know how great of a job the ECU job is. Wasn't ECU the school that there was the kid that was Tennessee was recruiting last offseason, the 6'5" post player or something like that.
Oh my goodness, who was that? I'll look that up. He went to a Power 5 school.
Okay, and I'd be interested to see how he did because I'd be interested to see how that.
Yeah, it was Jaden Garner.
I personally didn't have very high hopes for what he could do at the next level.
Oh, it was Jaden Gardner. He went to Virginia and averaged 15.3 points, 6.6 boards. So
never mind.
Bad. His 3-point shooting, he didn't really attempt any threes. He was all right. He made 51.5% of his deuce. I mean, he started all 32 games for Virginia, so he was a consistent guy in their starting rotation there.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know how good of a job that. I don't know. That league is decent. You've got brands, but that league is also falling apart a little bit with, Houston's gone. I can't remember everybody. UCF is gone. I can't remember everybody that's leaving, but Houston. I mean, I'm sorry to Houston. Memphis is still there for some weird reason. I thought they'd go after Memphis too, but yeah, I mean, like it's a decent job. It's going to pay well. American jobs are usually in the $1 to $1.3, I guess, $1 million range. I'm just assuming you can't. That league has got money. Those are big cities, big brands. There's money to be made there, and so he's going to have a chance to build something there. He's going to have a chance to develop something there. So good for him, and we'll see what happens because, I mean, if he gives us 2 years, there'll be 7 SEC jobs open because that's kind of how it works in this league.
For the quality of the ECU job, they haven't had a winning season since the 2012-2013 season when they went 23-12. That was back when they were in the Conference USA. Before that, the last winning season they had was 1996-1997 when they went 17-10. So they don't have very many winning seasons, Gene, and they've only made 2 NCAA tournaments ever, and they have not won a game. They've made it in the 1993 NCAA tournament, which I assume was because they won the CAA tournament because they were 13-17 overall. So it had to have been because they won the tournament in 1993, the year I was born, which is weird. And then you go back to 1972 as the other time they made the NCAA tournament and lost in the first. And again, they were 14-15 that year, so they must have only ever made the tournaments because they won the tournament and they happened to be just like a surprise too because they were not very good both the times they've made the NCAA tournament. So not a very high quality job in men's basketball for ECU. But you're right. Like, I mean, that's an opportunity for Schwartz. I think it's interesting that he's getting it when Joe Dooley got the team to a 500 record this year and was the first time they'd been 500 since the 2013-2014 season when they were also, at 500 when they were 17-17 under Jeff Lebo over there. Back then. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a really good point about, who would Barnes hire? It doesn't need, kind of be a quote unquote lifer guy, or does he have that on the staff as a guy like Justin Gainey that on the staff? Because Gainey is a guy who he's not old, but he's definitely not old. He's in his 40s, but he's born in 1977. He's from North Carolina. I don't think he has been a head coach. He's never been a head coach. Doesn't mean, he's been in the coaching ranks since 2006. He was at NC State as an administrative coordinator, and then was the director of operations there, and then went to go be an assistant coach at Elon in 2009. We talked about him. Like, he's a guy who's been, I think, Rod Clark was the guy in the JUCO ranks, but Rod Clark's my age. Like, he literally, he was born a month before me. He's 29. So he's a guy who has that kind of up and coming feel to him of a guy who, like you said, I don't know that he's a long-term guy at Tennessee. I think he's another guy you could see potentially go and get a head coaching job somewhere. But Gainey is a guy who has 15 years of Division I coaching and administrative experience. I wonder if he's maybe a more long-term hire than Rod Clark. And then again, if that's the case, if Barnes views him as the long-term guy, does he go out and get someone who, like you said, is going to be here for a season or two and then feels like they can bounce? So I don't know, that's a really good point you made that I hadn't really thought about, that Barnes has had more stable guys who have been here for 3 or 4 years, while those other guys have kind of come and gone. And Schwartz is definitely one of those guys who'd been here for almost for the entire Rick Barnes era at Tennessee. He'd been here, so that's a very good point. Again, that's why I feel like you said he just kind of waited his time, and hopefully this is a great spot for him. Like you said, it has the connections there with Gilbert, who also has a son as a walk-on at Tennessee. Just find that interesting. But there's a lot of other stuff we could talk about. We could go on for another hour if I wanted to really bring up the LSU stuff, the Georgia stuff, the Florida stuff. But Gene, we may save that for another episode, because there was all kinds of coaching movement in the SEC with Will Wade getting fired, Mike White jumping ship from Florida to go to Georgia, Frank Martin getting fired at South Carolina, Conzo Martin getting fired at Missouri. It was pink slip weekend and Monday for SEC coaches, and I don't know that we're done necessarily, because obviously Florida's got to go hire a coach. I wonder if Ole Miss hangs on to Kermit Davis. I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting too, Gene, to see if anybody comes after your boy over there at UTC here in the SEC, or just in general, just anywhere else at a bigger school than UTC. But I'm going to go ahead and end the podcast here. Thank you all so much for tuning in for this. And again, if you missed the live stream, go back and rewatch that on our YouTube channel. But also subscribe to the podcast while you're here as well. Thank you all so much for listening in. If it's your first time, if it's your 20th time, if it's your 60th time, thank you all, regardless of how many times you listen to the show. We really appreciate the support. You've helped us grow a lot. We're getting close to our 1-year anniversary of the rebrand to Vol Basketball Fever. Our first time ever talking about the NCAA Tournament while it's happening. So got a lot of stuff planned for you guys, a lot of cool stuff coming down the wire. Again, did our first live stream on Sunday, so check that out if you haven't seen it yet, and go watch the replay on our YouTube channel. We're Vol Basketball Fever there. We're at Vol Hoops Fever on Twitter, and we're Vol Basketball Fever on Facebook. I don't think I've plugged those in a while, so go follow us and like the page there, and leave us a nice 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael. This has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.